They knew that's the part that should haunt you. Engineers knew, inspectors knew, government officials knew. For years they saw the cracks forming, they read the reports, they attended the meetings, they nodded, filed the paperwork, and did nothing. And on July 28, 1976, at 4:53 in the morning, a chemical reactor in Seveso, Italy, exploded. A white cloud of toxic gas rolled across the countryside. By the time the sun rose, animals were dying in the fields. Children were waking up with burns on their skin, and the people in charge, the ones who knew, were already preparing their lies. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. A calculated decision that profits mattered more than lives. And what happened in Seveso didn't stay in Seveso. It became the blueprint for industrial disasters around the world. The same pattern, the same lies, the same people left to suffer while corporations and governments cover their tracks. So let's be clear about what really happened. And let's be clear about who's still getting away with it. The factory was owned by ICMESA, a subsidiary of Givaudan, which itself was owned by the Swiss pharmaceutical giant Hoffmann-La Roche. They manufactured chemicals for herbicides and cosmetics. One of those chemicals was called trichlorophenol, or TCP. It was used to make pesticides. The process was dangerous. TCP production required extremely high temperatures and precise control. If the reaction overheated, even slightly, it could produce a byproduct. That byproduct was 2,3,7,8-tetrachlorodibenzoyl-dioxin, TCDD, dioxin, one of the most toxic substances ever created by human industry. A single gram could kill thousands of people. It causes cancer, birth defects, immune system collapse, skin lesions that never heal, and it doesn't break down. Once it's in the soil and the water in your body, it stays there. The factory in Seveso had been producing TCP since 1969. For 7 years, they knew dioxin contamination was a risk. Internal documents later revealed that Hoffmann-La Roche scientists had studied the problem. They knew the reactor could overheat. They knew dioxin could form. They knew an explosion was possible, but safety upgrades cost money. Shutting down production cost money, so they did nothing. On the morning of July 24, 1976, the reactor was heating a batch of TCP. The normal procedure required cooling the mixture slowly after the reaction, but it was a Saturday. The workers wanted to go home for the weekend. Supervisors decided to shut down the reactor early and let it cool on its own over the weekend. It was a shortcut, one they'd taken before, but this time something went wrong. The cooling system failed. The temperature inside the reactor climbed. By the time anyone realized, it was too late. At 4:53 a.m. on July 28th, the reactor burst. A safety disc designed to release pressure gave way. A white plume of gas and vapor shot 30 meters into the air. Inside that cloud, 6 kilograms of pure dioxin. The wind was blowing south, toward the towns, toward the homes, toward the people. The residents of Seveso had no idea what was happening. The explosion was heard, but the factory didn't sound an alarm. No evacuation order was given. No warning. People woke up that morning and went about their day. By afternoon, animals started dying. Chickens, rabbits, cats, dogs, they convulsed and collapsed. Their skin blistered. Children playing outside came home with rashes. By evening, hundreds of dead animals littered the streets. The smell was unbearable. And still, no one from the factory said a word. It wasn't until July 29th, over 24 hours after the explosion, that ICMESA sent a sample of the gas to a lab in Switzerland for analysis. The results came back on July 30th. Dioxin. Lethal concentrations. The Italian authorities were informed on July 31st, 3 full days after the explosion, 3 days during which people breathed the air, touched the soil, and drank the water, 3 days during which the contamination spread. And even then, the evacuation was slow. Officials didn't want to cause panic. They didn't want to hurt business. They didn't want to admit how bad it was. The first evacuation zone was declared on August 2nd. It covered just over 100 hectares and affected about 220 people. But the contamination was far worse than anyone admitted. Over the following weeks, the zone expanded. Eventually, Over 1,800 acres were declared contaminated. More than 700 people were evacuated from the most affected areas, known as Zone A. Another 4,600 were relocated from Zone B, where contamination was lower but still dangerous. Thousands more lived in surrounding areas with elevated dioxin levels, but were never evacuated. The Italian government established a contamination threshold, 50 micrograms of dioxin per square meter of soil. Anything above that was considered unsafe. In some areas of Seveso, levels reached over 500 micrograms per square meter, 10 times the danger level, and those were just the spots they tested. Much of the area was never fully surveyed. The real contamination map remains unknown. The health impacts began immediately. Within days, children and adults developed chloracne, severe, painful skin lesions caused by dioxin exposure. Over 200 cases were documented, but the true number was likely higher. Many people didn't report symptoms out of fear or shame. Chloracne scars lasted for years, sometimes for life. But the real horror was slower. Dioxin doesn't kill quickly. It kills over time. Cancer rates in the affected population began to rise within a decade. Studies later showed significant increases in liver cancer, lymphoma, and leukemia among those exposed. Women who were pregnant at the time of the explosion faced impossible choices. Dioxin causes severe birth defects, missing limbs, organ malformations, neurological damage. The Italian government, under pressure from the Catholic Church, initially refused to allow abortions. Women had to travel to other countries or carry pregnancies to term knowing their children might be born with catastrophic deformities. Eventually, exceptions were made. Dozens of women terminated pregnancies. The psychological toll was immense. And the children who were born, many suffered developmental delays, immune disorders, and cancers later in life. The cleanup took years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The most contaminated soil, over 80,000 cubic meters, was excavated and sealed in drums. But where do you put dioxin-contaminated soil? No country wanted it. The barrels sat in a storage facility in Seveso for years while governments argued. Eventually, in 1982, the waste was secretly transported to a landfill in northern France. The French government was furious. It became an international scandal. The waste was later moved again, this time to a specialized incinerator in Switzerland. But even incineration doesn't destroy dioxin completely. Some of it remains in the ash. The topsoil in Seveso was replaced. Buildings in Zone A were demolished. The debris was buried in a sealed underground facility covered with concrete and clay. A park was built on top of it. Today, it's called Bosco del Querce, the Oak Forest. Families picnic there. Children play. Beneath them, thousands of tons of toxic waste. The park is monitored constantly. Signs warn against digging or disturbing the soil. But memories are short. And every year, fewer people remember what lies beneath. Compensation was a battle. Hoffmann-La Roche eventually paid out over $160 million in damages and cleanup costs, but the victims fought for years. Many received only a few $1,000s each. The company admitted no criminal wrongdoing. Executives faced trials in Italy, but the penalties were minimal. Fines, suspended sentences. No one went to prison. The message was clear. You can poison a community, kill people slowly, and as long as you have money and lawyers, you walk away. The factory was dismantled. ICMESA ceased to exist. Hoffmann-La Roche restructured. The brand survived. The victims did not. By 2000, studies estimated that dioxin exposure from Seveso contributed to hundreds of premature deaths. The exact number will never be known because the company and the government controlled the data. Death certificates didn't list dioxin as a cause. Cancer was just cancer. Liver failure was just liver failure. The pattern was buried in statistics. But Seveso was not unique. It was just the one that couldn't be hidden. 2 years earlier, in 1974, a chemical plant in Flixborough, England, exploded, killing 28 workers and injuring dozens more. Investigators found that safety systems had been bypassed to keep production running. In 1984, a pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, leaked methyl isocyanic gas, killing thousands in a single night. The plant was owned by Union Carbide, an American company. Safety standards in Bhopal were far below what would have been required in the United States. The company knew. They did nothing. In 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico, killing 11 workers and spilling millions of barrels of oil. BP had ignored safety warnings for months. Engineers had flagged problems. Managers overruled them. The pattern repeats because the system allows it. Corporations calculate risk versus profit. If the profit is high enough and the legal penalty is low enough, they accept the risk. And when disaster strikes, they deny, delay, and deflect. Governments assist. They don't want to scare investors. They don't want to admit they failed to regulate. So they minimize, they suppress studies. They settle out of court. And the victims are left with nothing but scars and medical bills. Seveso did lead to one lasting change. In 1982, the European Community passed the Seveso Directive, a set of regulations requiring companies handling hazardous chemicals to assess risks, implement safety measures, and inform the public. It was updated in 1996 and again in 2012 after further disasters. The directive is now a cornerstone of industrial safety law in Europe. But compliance is uneven. Enforcement is weak. Penalties for violations are often trivial compared to company profits, and the directive doesn't apply outside Europe. Chemical plants in Asia, Africa, and South America operate with far fewer safeguards. The risk has been exported, not eliminated. And even in Europe, accidents still happen. In 2001, an explosion at a fertilizer plant in Toulouse, France, killed 31 people. In 2015, a chemical warehouse explosion in Tianjin, China, killed at least 173. The companies knew the risks. They chose profit. What makes Seveso particularly haunting is the knowledge. This wasn't ignorance. It wasn't an unforeseen consequence. Hoffmann-La Roche knew dioxin was dangerous. They had research. They had scientists. They could have installed better safety systems. They could have shut down the reactor properly. They could have sounded the alarm immediately after the explosion. Every step of the way, they chose silence, chose delay, chose profit, and the Italian government enabled them. Local officials were slow to act. National authorities were slow to investigate. The Catholic Church intervened to prevent abortions, prioritizing ideology over the health of women and children. The system protected the powerful and sacrificed the vulnerable. And that pattern continues today. When a factory pollutes a river, who drinks the water? Not the executives. When a mine collapses, who's buried? Not the shareholders. When a chemical plant explodes, who breathes the poison? Not the regulators who approve the permits. The people of Seveso were told it was safe to return. They were told the cleanup was complete. They were told the danger had passed. But dioxin doesn't go away. It's still there. In the soil that wasn't excavated, in the dust inside old buildings, in the bodies of those who were exposed. Studies continue to track the health of survivors and their children. Cancer rates remain elevated, immune disorders are common, and the children born to parents who were exposed, second-generation victims, show higher rates of illness. Dioxin damages DNA. The damage is heritable. The disaster echoes through generations. And every time a company lobbies to weaken environmental regulations, every time a government cuts funding for inspections, every time a whistleblower is silenced, the risk of another Seveso grows. So why does this keep happening? Because the people who make the decisions never face the consequences. The executive who cuts the safety budget doesn't live near the factory. The investor who demands higher profits doesn't breathe the air downwind. The politician who approves the permit doesn't drink the water downstream. They are insulated by wealth, by geography, by power, and the legal system protects them. Corporate liability is limited. Fines are capped. Criminal prosecutions are rare. Even when they happen, sentences are light. A few years in a minimum security prison. a fine that's a fraction of annual revenue. Meanwhile, the victims wait decades for compensation that never comes. They watch their children get sick. They bury their parents. They live with pain that no amount of money can fix. And they're told to move on, to stop dwelling on the past, to accept that accidents happen. But Seveso was not an accident. It was a choice. And every disaster like it is a choice. The choice to prioritize profit over people. The choice to hide the truth rather than face it. The choice to let people suffer rather than admit fault. And until we hold the decision-makers accountable, until executives face real prison time, until companies pay damages that actually hurt, until governments prioritize people over industry, the disasters will continue. The names will change. The locations will change. But the pattern will remain. They will know. They will do nothing. And people will die. That's the truth they don't want you to understand. That's the truth Seveso proved. And that's the truth that 47 years later we still refuse to face.